Yeah, next question from Tony is breath holding during strength training. Is it good or bad? So, what I will say here is that a lot of people will claim that breath holding is bad for various reasons. For example, it is going to acutely increase your blood pressure. It can increase intracerebral pressure. And basically, it's just putting a lot of pressure on the system. But that's effectively the goal. Like you're trying to develop rigidity in your body to be able to move as much weight as possible. Um, Now, with that said, there's some cases where maybe it mightn't be the best idea. So, for example, if someone gets exertion or pressure headaches, or someone has uh, had recent brain surgery or a history of recurring aneurysms in their brain or in their aorta or something along those lines, maybe you wouldn't consider breath holding to be something
Or
that's
something
useful.
like a hernia that they
Yeah.
consistently get.
Yeah. If they've got a hernia that's clearly aggravated by breath holding, or they had, surgical repair of a hernia and the scars healing, etc. But they're all kind of medical or surgical complications or considerations that you'd probably be speaking to your doctor about. Um, and to be honest, I don't think otherwise it's something that's going to be harmful, because ultimately, yes, you do get the spike in blood pressure, very large spikes in blood pressure, in fact, when you're using a Valsalva maneuver, or just breath holding in general. But it's over a very short duration. Generally, you're talking 3 to 6 seconds of breath holding, and then you're taking a breath again. And we already know that strength training, even in the presence of heavier loads and breath holding, leads to reductions in blood pressure on average. So while you do get the acute spike, it's not necessarily concordant with a chronic increase in blood pressure. So I think they'd be the major concerns that people would typically have. The only other thing that I would say is that some people can get like a kind of like a source of fainting, basically, if they hold their breath, like a vagal response, vasovagal response, where when you hold your breath and you're suddenly find yourself getting lightheaded after a set, and then you fall, and collapse. Like obviously that's not great,
Like you see
but
that on like deadlift videos all the time.
yeah, deadlift videos. But typically that's like one rep max, like straining for 10 seconds on the way up. Like for most people, that's not going to be an issue. If it's something that you struggle with on a recurring basis, then I would, stay a bit further from failure would be my first port of call. And if it's genuinely that much of an issue, one, see a doctor, and two, consider using safer exercises potentially. There's some medical conditions that can lead to those types of responses too. But again, they're medical conditions. And the vast majority of people, breath holding, in my eyes, is good because it supports your strength.
Yeah. Well, I would say almost the exact opposite, not the opposite to you in terms of the opposite to the question. I'd be like, is not holding your breath unsafe?
Yeah.
Like if someone was coming to me and they're like, oh, I'm going to squat and I'm not doing any kind of Valsalva maneuver, not like, filling your stomach with air, not holding your breath, not holding that tight. I'd be like, that's kind of unsafe. Like you're putting yourself in a position where like your spine isn't really supported. Like it's supposed to
Yeah.
be, you're supposed to strain, if you will, to keep that support, that intra-abdominal pressure. So in my mind, I'd be like, it's kind of unsafe not to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there is a concern here, like you've noted a few of them, but also if we're doing like continuous reps, like there's a difference between like holding your breath for one rep, breathing out on the way up or whatever at the top and resetting, bracing again, maybe even 2-3 reps. But if you're holding your breath for a rep or a set of 15, like that's a completely different thing. And you're probably limiting your ability to train by virtue of the fact that you're
Yeah.
literally like getting hypoxia because you're just holding your breath for 15 reps or whatever it is. So there has to be some breathing going on, whether it's you reset after every single rep, whether it's you reset after 2-3 reps, whatever. It really depends on the exercise, etc. But yeah, I would probably be very pro holding your breath at certain stages, but I'm also very pro breathing. So it's about finding that balance in terms of you want to be able to continue doing your set and not just be lightheaded after rep 5 because you've basically been holding your breath since the start of rep 1. So you do need to also breathe, which then comes back to the fact that it's like, okay, you want to hold your breath at just specific times to do that kind of Valsalva maneuver. And then in between that, you are actually still breathing. So are you really holding your breath? Yeah, transiently for a couple of milliseconds, basically. But overall, it's not actually that long. Obviously, if you're doing longer reps, like you're doing a 5 second eccentric pause, whatever, like you could be holding your breath for a significant amount of time. But the way most people do reps, it's over in like less than a second, So you're not really holding your breath all that long. Like I've had exhalations and like the pause, the turnaround time between the time you exhale and the time you inhale. I've had longer of those than the way most people hold their breath during a set. So
Yeah, and then just one final thing on that as well is that often this isn't actually a conscious thing. Like if you look at the research on weight training and Valsalva maneuvers, most people actually do this subconsciously. So anytime they're straining, anytime they're like, let's say, even if people are like lifting a fridge or something, you see people and hear people going, that typical sound that people make. And that's them performing a Valsalva without them realizing it. So they're breath holding / bracing, even if they're not doing the whole, elaborate that powerlifters will do. But yeah, it's fairly involuntary. It makes sense. It makes you stronger. It allows you to lift more weight. It's potentially protective against injury, or at least very poor and inefficient use of your muscles. So yes, it's a yes from me outside of medical or surgical contraindications.